Now we are discussing the first topic of our subject, component layout of AT or ATX motherboard. What is motherboard? Generally, the mother will take care of all the requirement of the children. Whatever he needs, a small baby, if he wants to play, he will tell to mother. If he wants to eat, he will tell to mother. Like that, this motherboard will take all the requirements of the computer. That's why we are calling this as a brain of the entire computer, and in this motherboard we are calling CPU as the brain. Okay, so first we are discussing what is the layout. Why we require layout, sir? Because if we take the different components in the motherboard, like dustbin, we can dump the components, but it will not give the performance, because each and every component we are using on the motherboard will have a specific application. So we have to carefully design the layout such that each component should be placed in a particular position. Then only the electromagnetic interference will not occur and it will work efficiently. So that's why layout is very much important. In this class, you are sitting in a very comfortable way. If the layout is not given properly, all are sitting in a clumsy way, then you might not be able to hear the class very concentrately. So that's why layout is very much important to decide the performance of the computer. Now, there are two important layouts. There are many layouts available for the motherboard, but there are only two important layouts which we can discuss. One is AT layout, Advanced Technology Layout. This was first introduced by the IBM. IBM came saying that we have introduced a motherboard. It will integrate all the components on the single board. Are all these components on one board? At that time in 1980, they have seen that with a big eyes, with a surprise. Because at that time on a single PCB, all the components are mounted. Now all these components are interconnected on the board. So that was the AT, Advanced Technology Motherboard. And the dimension of the motherboard is 12 by 13.18 inches. Later in 1996, after 16 years, Intel came. We are also there in the market. You know, Intel i3 processors, i5 processors, i7 processors, i9 processors. Then Intel came. We are present. They have upgraded this motherboard and they called this as Advanced Technology Extension. So ATX. So this is having 24 pins power supply connector. So they have extended. This is having 12 by 9.6 inches size. And later they have made it very small. Why small? Because each day we want to reduce the size of the motherboard. If the size of the motherboard is reduced, then the computer size also will become small. I want a computer in pocket size. Then they are reducing to this ATX motherboard to micro, mini, nano. These kind of motherboards came. So here this is 9.6 by 9.6 square motherboard. That is micro motherboard came. That was introduced by the Intel later. So these are the two important versions. One is AT, that was designed by who designed AT? IBM. ATX was designed by Intel. Okay, AT means advanced. Very good. ATX means very good. Now we are taking the one important component, CPU. We are telling CPU as the brain of computer. Like brain is important to us to communicate all the organs. Similarly, CPU is important to communicate with all the components on the motherboard. All the calculations, all the required instructions, it will take care. That's why it is a microprocessor based CPU. If your CPU is advanced, then the motherboard cost will increase. Sir, my processor is i3, it is fine. i5 price is increased. Sir, I am using i7, cost a little more. i9, little more cost. So your laptop or computer cost will depend upon the processor. How much advanced processor you are using, that much cost you have to bear from your pocket. How much advanced the processor is, that much efficiently your computer will work. This is about the CPU. Now, when we are turning on the computer, we are using a BIOS chip. BIOS means basic input output system. What is BIOS? Very good. So this BIOS is a RAM chip. RAM means read-only memory. BIOS is a RAM chip or RAM chip? Random access memory or read-only memory? Read-only memory. Means once we write the program, we cannot erase it. This is fixed. We don't want to erase it. So this is the BIOS. Sir, for what purpose we are using this BIOS? You are turning on the computer. Once you turn on the computer, BIOS will come into action. Okay, you have turned on me, I will take care. Like if you see for Diwali, small cracker, if you ignite with a matchstick, that will take care of the remaining. For a bike, if you self-start, that will take care of the remaining. Similarly, here, once you turn on, BIOS RAM chip will turn on. It will initiate the process. That's why we will call that as a motherboard firmware. This BIOS chip is called as motherboard firmware. So this will take care of giving supply to all other components. Or is this BIOS giving direct supply 12 volts, 4 volts, 6 volts? No. BIOS is not battery. So then how you are saying this is giving supply? It is taking care. Okay, properly instruction is given. Okay, give the supply to this, give the supply to this, give the supply to this. That instruction is programmed in the BIOS chip. Because it is read-only memory, that program, there is no need to change. Once we initiate, then once the RAM is started, then all the remaining components will turn on. In olden days, when they are using the RAM, they have to continuously turn on the RAM. Then only keyboard and mouse will turn on. If they turn off the RAM for 1 minute, then the keyboard and mouse will not work. But we are lucky in modern days. Once we turn on BIOS, after that, there is in the keyboard we are directly connecting to USB. And mouse also we are directly connecting into USB port. So olden days, once we turn on the BIOS, we have to continuously use it. Now after turning on, we can remove it. But your computer will not allow it because it is integrated. Okay. So when OS runs in the BIOS, when it turned on, operating system is running in the BIOS. Then we are calling this as a power on self-test mode. Power on self-test mode. So, which chip we are calling as a motherboard firmware? Which chip we are calling? BIOS. BIOS chip. BIOS is a RAM or RAM chip? It is made with CMOS. Now we are discussing about RAM slots. RAM means? Very good. Random access memory. Randomly I am accessing memory. So we are having slots, different slots on the motherboard. Whatever the processor, the current program it is using and the current data it is using, that current program and data is stored in the RAM. That particular RAM we will place in the RAM slot. Generally there are 2 RAM slots. And also some motherboards are having 4 RAM slots. Different types of RAMs are there. We have desktop RAMs and laptop RAMs. Same RAMs will not work for desktop and laptop. In desktop also SD RAM is there and DDR type RAMs are there. Mostly we are using the DDR type RAMs. DDR1, DDR2, DDR3. If you are using DDR1 RAM, then the slot should be DDR1 only. If you are using DDR2 RAM, then the slot should be DDR2 only. If you are using DDR3 RAM, then the slot should be DDR3. Okay, this is about the RAM slots. Now we are discussing about the CMOS backup battery. We are having small battery in the motherboard. What is the purpose of this battery? RAM is having some memory. what memory, whatever the present task that is being done by the CPU, that memory will be stored in the RAM. And the most frequently used memory, RAM will make reservation, that will be in the cache memory. This is cache. Every day you are using, because if one student is coming every day and he is saying this is my place, one day if he is absent also, that place will be kept for him, because that is reserved. Similarly, in the RAM, some portion of the memory is reserved for the frequently used data. Okay, that is what we are calling as cache memory. So fast communication will happen with the cache memory. Right. Now cache is RAM memory, ROM memory? RAM memory. RAM means random access memory or read-only memory? Very good, random access memory. Now, why we are using this battery? Suddenly power is turned off. Whatever the data that is there in the RAM, cache, entirely it will be, if there is no power supply, that will be wiped off. If we give the power supply, that will take care. Temporary power supply. And have you ever observed, once we turn off the computer, for the turn off time, if the time is now example 3 o'clock, after 1 hour if we turn on the computer, it will show 4 o'clock only. Sir, but computer is turned off. Yes, computer is turned off, but the BIOS chip is storing the information that is related to time and date. If the time and date are stagnated, it is showing the starting date, then that is indicating that there is a problem in the CMOS battery. Then you have to replace that battery. Okay? Next, this is about the CMOS backup. Now we are discussing about bus expansion slot. Expansion slots, why we require? We have motherboard, sir. We have many components, but we have to interconnect with other devices. For that we require the slot. The first slot is PCI slot. PCI. Okay? PCI means, what is PCI? Peripheral, because we are taking input and output components. That's why we are calling as peripheral components, because we are taking input and output components. Peripheral component interconnection. Peripheral component interconnection. When we will use, if any port, either our mouse port or keyboard port or our printer port or our LAN port, if any port fails because of any reason, then we can give the extension by using this PCI. We can connect the extension slot to it. So in the case of the failure, I am saying PCI, I am backup option, I am ready, sir, for you. Whatever the slot you give, I am ready to take it. Extension slot, you can connect at the PCI. Then what is this PCIe? Peripheral component interconnection extend. What extension you have given? For the graphic card. If you have dedicated graphic card, if you want to play the games on the computer, then you can connect the card to this PCIe. Then we are having AGP slot. AGP means accelerated graphics port. Accelerated graphics port. Accelerated graphics port. When it is coming accelerated graphics, you can immediately understand it is indicating about the video. If you want to connect any video card, then AGP is saying, I am ready to take. I can understand the video data. That's how we are using the AGP slot. And the next one is ISA slot. ISA means Industry Standard Architecture. Industry Standard Architecture slots now we are not using. Previously they have used 8-bit slots. Nowadays we are not using. Extended Industry Standard Architecture, this also we are not using. But this is extended, sir. Extended from 8-bit to 32-bit. But still it is not useful now. Previously these two slots are useful. But now we are using only PCI slot. This PCI slot also not useful now. But they are being continuing from the long time. So they are keeping, okay, let this PCI be. Remaining all the slots we are not using now. Okay, now we are discussing about some connectors. IDE, EIDE, SATA connectors. IDE. So this IDE, whenever you are taking this IDE cable, previously, nowadays we are not using the IDE cable. This is a ribbon cable. In the computer, if you observe any ribbon cable, then you can say this is IDE previously. So this IDE cable was connected to IDE connector. It is having 40 pins. For what purpose we will use this IDE? For connecting to hard disk. But now in order to connect to this hard disk, we are using the SATA cable. Okay, what is SATA cable? Serial Advanced Technology Attachment. Okay, Serial Advanced Technology Attachment. It was introduced in August 2001 and it is having only 7 pins. Now if you want to connect to the hard disk, you can use this SATA cable. Nowadays you can hear this term SATA cable. We are having 2 SATA ports generally on the motherboard. But in latest motherboards we can have even 4 SATA ports also. Now what is this chipset? We have the processor want to communicate with all the components. But the components cannot understand the process language. Then some chips are there to understand the language of the processor. In order to communicate with the processor, we have these chips. We combined these chips and called as chipset. We mainly use 2 chipsets. One is north bridge, second one is south bridge. Sir, you are saying chipset, but you are saying bridge. Is it not north chipset? No. Is it not south chipset? No. It is north bridge. Why bridge? Because it is bridging between the CPU and components. So this chipset is bridging like a bridge. If you want to go from one place to another place, then we require a bridge on a river. So similarly, CPU here bridging. That's why we are calling this as north bridge and south bridge. So in the north bridge, CPU will communicate with the memory. Whenever CPU want to communicate with the RAM, then it is calling north bridge come. This is the information I want to communicate. Okay sir, I will communicate the same thing to memory RAM. This is the information given by the CPU. Okay, I understood. This is the reply from me. North bridge, it brings the reply and saying it gives to the CPU. It will take care. It will not happen as I mentioned. That will not carry the information. Only for your understanding I told. Okay, next what south bridge will do? It will understand the communication between CPU and PCI slots. Just now we told PCI slots when we are using, when there is a failure of the slot. Okay, PCI and SATA cable when we want to communicate with the hard disk. Then also south bridge chipset will be there. When we want to communicate with the USB. All output I/O, whenever we want to communicate with the all I/O ports, then we have to use this south bridge chipset. But in modern day, we are not using the north bridge. Why? Because those functions are incorporated in the CPU, whereas the functions of the south bridge are still there. So we are using platform controller hub. So this platform controller hub, it is a new name for the south bridge. So in modern day computer, which bridge is not there? North bridge or south bridge? North bridge is not there. South bridge function is being performed with the platform controller hub. Okay. Next we have onboard I/O connectors. Onboard I/O connectors PS2. Okay. So we are having 2 ports. One port is for keyboard and another port is for mouse. Generally lower port we will use for the keyboard and upper port we will use for the mouse. Next VGA, we will connect it to the monitor. What is VGA? Video graphic array. Very good. So we will connect this VGA port by using a cable to the monitor. But in modern days we are not using VGA, we are using HDMI port. So this HDMI port we will use to connect into the monitor or for the projector. Next, serial port we will use generally to connect to a modem. Serial port or COM port, communication port. When you connect Arduino to your computer, it is a COM1, COM2, COM3 serial port. Okay, serial communication. It will show baud rate also. You can watch my Arduino tutorial. There you can understand. Okay, right. Next. Parallel port. We can connect the printer to parallel port. But remember, nowadays modern printers, they are capable. We can connect to even for the serial port. That is exception. Okay, right. USB port, LAN port, you know USB port, we can connect any pen drives you can connect, LAN cable, LAN port, we can connect the Ethernet. Whenever you want to internet, you can connect the cable to LAN. Next, audio port, we can connect whatever the mic if you want to, you can connect the mic or speaker, you can connect to the audio port. Cache we have already discussed. This is the layout of the motherboard. Now you have learnt what is motherboard. We are just revising. For the performance of the computer, in order to perform the computer efficiently, we should have layout. Okay? What are the two main layouts we discussed? One is AT. Second one is AT means very good. ATX means very good. Which is modern? AT or ATX? Which was introduced by IBM? AT. Which was introduced by Intel? Okay. 9.6 by 9.6 ATX or micro ATX? Micro ATX. Inches. 9.6 by 9.6 inches micro ATX dimension. Which part of the motherboard we are calling as a brain? CPU. CPU is a processor. Okay. i3 processor is more cost or i5 processor is more cost? Okay. So this CPU, it will communicate, it will do processing with the remaining all components in the motherboard. What is BIOS? Basic input output system. When we turn on the computer, first what part will take the power? BIOS. Which part will make all other components should turn on safely? BIOS. BIOS is ROM chip or RAM chip? ROM chip. Read only memory or random access memory? Very good. CMOS or TTL technology we are using? CMOS. CMOS. Which chip we are calling as a motherboard firmware? BIOS. In olden days, in order to operate the keyboard and the mouse, BIOS should be continuously operated or at one time it should be operated? Continuously operated. Okay. When the OS runs in the BIOS at the starting, we are calling that as power on self-test. Power on self-test. Okay. RAM slots. Generally, how many RAM slots we have? 2 to 4 RAM slots. For desktop, DDR or SDRAM we are using. We have three types of the RAM. DDR1, DDR2, DDR3. If I am using a DDR2 slot, then which type of RAM I have to use? Which type of RAM I have to use? DDR2. Okay. Next, CMOS backup battery. What is the, for what purpose we will use the battery? In order to give the supply to BIOS and for the RAM. In order to give the supply to RAM and BIOS. When the computer turns on immediately, because of the supply, the memory in the RAM, it will not be wiped off immediately. Now, what is the battery we are using? Lithium battery we are using. Okay. Now, expansion slots we have discussed. If any slot fails on the motherboard, which slot we are using? PCI means peripheral component interconnect. What is PCIe? Extended. For what purpose we are using? For graphics. Okay, next AZP. For what purpose we are using? Video card. ISA, EISA presently we are not using. What is ISA? Industry Standard Architecture. EISA Extended. AZP means Accelerated Graphics Port. Okay. IDE we are using. IDE for what purpose we are using? To connect to hard disk. In modern days we are replacing IDE with Very good. SATA means Serial Advanced Technology Attachment. It was introduced in 2001. Chipset. The CPU want to communicate with the remaining components. So mainly there are two chipsets. One is north bridge, second one is south bridge. North, whenever we want CPU want to communicate with the memory, which chipset will take care? North bridge. Whenever it want to communicate with the I/O devices, which chipset will take care? In modern day computer, which chipset is not there? North bridge. South bridge chipset we are calling as platform controller hub. Okay. Onboard PS2 port. For what purpose we are using this port? Keyboard and mouse. In modern day we don't require. In modern day generally we are using one PS port. We can connect either keyboard or mouse. Next, serial connector. We are also calling this as a COM connector. Parallel connector generally we use for the connecting the printer. USB means universal serial bus. USB port we can connect the USB cable. And LAN. In a LAN port we will use to connect to the Ethernet. Audio cable and cache memory. Fastest memory of the RAM. Whatever the frequently we are using the data, that data we will keep in the RAM. What is the brain of the motherboard? CPU. Which will take care about the giving the supply to all other components? BIOS. Previous to HDMI, which was used to connect to the monitor? VGA. Okay. Now when a expansion slot, when a slot fails, which slot we will use? Very good. For backup power, what battery we are using? Okay, CMOS lithium battery we are using. Okay. BIOS is RAM chip or ROM chip? Very good. Today you have learnt about the motherboard.